Welcome to Workforces. I'm Julian Alssid.
And I'm Kaitlin LeMoine, and we speak with the innovators who shape the future of work and learning.
Together, we unpack the complex elements of workforce and career preparation and offer practical solutions that can be scaled and sustained.
Workforces is supported by Lumina Foundation. Lumina is an independent private foundation in Indianapolis that is committed to making opportunities for learning beyond high school available to all. Let's dive in. One of the biggest challenges we face in aligning education to workforce needs is a disconnect between education and industry, especially when it comes to building new learning models.
So true, Caitlin. And this gap became apparent as we began to shift to a knowledge-based economy 30-ish years ago. And addressing the gap is a big part of what attracted both of us to education and workforce development in the first place. But now it's taken center stage. Workers and students are frustrated and falling behind, and employers are way more interested in addressing the disconnect than ever before.
Yes, there is now a much greater emphasis on skills, from skills-based hiring to skills-based learning. And while identifying common skills across education providers and employers is a piece of the work, we also need to drive broader systems level change.
Yeah, and as we know from our own consulting work, this is no small task. And our guest today is working on bringing sense and clarity to systems level efforts. And we're excited to welcome Naomi Boyer to the podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us, Naomi. To give a bit of background on Naomi's years in this work, she's a driving force in transforming education for the future of work. As Senior Vice President of Digital Transformation at the Education Design Lab, she leads initiatives on digital microcredentials, skills-based learning, and competency frameworks, ensuring learners are equipped for success in a rapidly evolving economy. With over 2 decades of experience in higher education, Naomi has a proven track record of innovation in areas including distance learning, faculty development, and global initiatives. She is a recognized expert in competency-based education and a passionate advocate for self-directed learning. And we're very excited to have her with us on the podcast today. So thank you for being here, Naomi.
So Caitlin gave a little of your background, but would love to hear in your own words about your background and your role at the Education Design Lab.
Thanks so much, Julian. First, I don't have supreme clarity. If I did, we'd all be rich and have everything figured out in our society and everything else. But part of why I'm in this work is because I have a passion for transforming education and learning and really helping facilitate differences in people's lives, right? And so that's an ongoing journey. And I don't think it's ever anything we're going to solve, but we can certainly make it easier and help people find their path as they go along. And so I actually started my journey in special education. And I think I use those skills every bit along the way here, even as I continue my own journey through life. And so I went from teaching special education to becoming a mom, and then went back and worked on my doctorate in a really funky area at the time, distance learning. And actually my doctorate, my specialty was in systemic change, or organizational change and systemic leadership. And then wrote my dissertation, though, on building online learning communities in international environments. So this is back in 2001. So at the advent of online learning. Mm-hmm. And it was at this point in my life that I really began realizing that I can't always decide I'm going from point A to point B. You got to kind of follow the journey and the rolling hills as you go along, and it'll take you to some really cool and fun places. And so through that journey, I ended up in higher ed, as you said, for over 17 years, both at a university, Research One University, and at a community college, in vice president positions that allowed me to do strategic innovations and change and contribute to all the cool stuff. I was chief information officer for five of the last years of that scope, and then jumped over to Education Design Lab, which you will hear me affectionately call to speak about as the lab versus Education Design Lab. I joined them over about 6 years ago and came in and working on digital microcredentials and a bunch of other things. I can tell you a little bit about the lab. the position I'm in now at the lab, I'm having the opportunity of really diving into three areas that are passionate for me. You've heard me say education transformation, the personalization of learning, I think is key and really a disruptor, which some of what I heard in one of your last podcasts with Michael Horn, he was talking about some of those
Mhm.
driving forces of personalization of learning. And then the individual and empowerment in the learning process and how an individual can gain control over their own processes of learning in life. And this is not something that we necessarily cultivate in our K-12 or even many of our higher ed classrooms. We cultivate compliant learners. And so people understanding and learning how to take control of their own learning process becomes absolutely instrumental. And so when I joined the lab, I was able to bring all of those three things together. And basically, I get to run amok. I love to run amok, and contribute. And that's why I say we don't have it all figured out. So using human-centered design is the methodology of the lab, and get to deal with the many pervasive issues that have created a fractured and limited talent development continuum. And how do we think about the things in between? And so the lab has basically three streams of work to do this. One of which is college transformation, where we work directly with community colleges and help them think about new and innovative non-degree credentials that they can introduce to be responsive to their local workforce and learners. We do some deep work in understanding who the new majority learner is, and we use the word new majority to refer to all of those learners that higher ed or those who fall out of the scope of who higher ed was originally designed for, right? Like the 18 to 22-year-old that is going to go full time to university. So the new majority are those, they don't fit into that mold. And then the area that I cover, which is digital transformation, which sounds like it's all about technology, but it's about leveraging the technology for that human experience. So how do we really think about human change, access, and opportunity, right? And really think about it for those who, in order to improve social mobility, economic vitality, for those who need it the most.
As you mentioned, the last focus of your work, the digital transformation piece. I appreciate your call out of like, it's not just about the technology, but can you tell us a little bit more about when you say, yes, our work is around digital transformation, what that means and what the problems are that you're looking to address through that element of your work?
There's no doubt that technology needs to be a component of thinking about scalable, accessible, innovative options for facilitating. I can go back to the beginning where I said personalization of learning and really rethinking the way we do things. In our current talent market, there's a disconnect between the way we may be using the technology tools to apply for a job, but we're not necessarily capitalizing on those tools so that Naomi can say what I know and can do, so that my skills are captured in such a way that they become transparent. So, at the lab, we deal with a number of problems, I'll say, or issues, challenges that are in that talent continuum. And I like to say we deal with wicked issues, big, hairy issues, right? Like portability, transferability, flexibility. And my work with digital transformation is really around the visibility. So how do we make each individual's skills visible, not only just for everyone else, but for themselves? What are the skills that I have? How do I then document those skills? How do I see the skills I need along a career trajectory? And then how do I make those skills visible in the marketplace for others to find me and for me to find a matchup with the skills that I have, right? And so whether that's through digital micro-credentialing, whether that's through what we call learning and employment records, whether it's through the validation and trusting of establishing trust in what someone knows and can do. There's all of these issues around visibility, and that's how we're using the technology to allow an individual to flow through their process and find it. But it's not about necessarily programming and technology, just about the technology.
Yes, and Naomi, that's great. It's all the stuff we love, Kaitlin. I mean, come on. So I'd love to hear a little bit about projects that you're most excited about currently, where you're employing, this personalization and the digital strategies. You'd mentioned Texas and Arizona when we talked earlier, but about some of the
Yep.
projects you're most excited about.
And some of the projects that I'm going to describe right now deal also with some of those big hairy issues I mentioned, right? Like, so one of the things that I'm hearing a lot from employers is trust. Not necessarily trust in the way you may hear some of our colleagues who are more technically focused talk about, which is the verification of credentials, but more about the trust whether a credential represents the true skills someone has. And that's the skill validation piece of things. And I've heard from employers that it's a crowded marketplace out there right now as far as what the credentials mean and what it looks like and how they can consume them. I've heard from my colleagues at the SHRM Foundation that they spend somewhere between 4 to 6 seconds. HR leaders spend somewhere between 4 to 6 seconds on resumes and as part of that hiring process. So how can I make sense of all of these credentials and information that's coming in this new skills-based marketplace? And so that's one piece of it. The other one, and one of those problems is that the skills continuum from learning the skills, documentation of those skills, transfer of those skills, and then using those skills for each to communicate something, whether that's into a higher ed degree, into another higher ed learning experience, or into some sort of employment. Those systems are broken because you have your education systems working and trying to get in play in this marketplace. You have your workforce support organizations that are talking about skills and doing their skills, and you have your employers who are doing the same thing. And most folks are in their own silos, in their own organizational sectors, trying to figure this stuff out, but the systems are not being connected together. How do we think about connecting those systems? In fact, I have a colleague from Colorado who's involved in a project called the Skills Forward work that's being done nationally. And she described the Colorado project. What something they didn't know going into the project was, and of course she was using a metaphor, very Colorado-ish, of trees. And she says each organization is a group of trees. But what didn't exist were the roots in between to connect those systems, right? And so the projects I'm going to talk to you about are all about how do we connect these systems, establish more trust, and really allow the conversations to happen around regions and industries to leverage the economic change that we're trying to create. So the first one I'll talk a little bit about is in Texas right now. And in fact, I just heard that there was new legislation that was being introduced to increase their cryptocurrency abilities and, the Bitcoin, developing Bitcoin resources. But right now, the area of western northern Texas, I'll say from Dallas to Odessa, is burgeoning forth with data processing centers, both the traditional data processing centers and those that are more, I'll say, on the crypto blockchain side of things. And there's a difference in those lines of industries. There's the same industry, but two tracks because of the type of individuals that can be attracted as far as talent that comes in the door to really work in those spaces. Right now, we're working on a project that is multifaceted. We started with the employers, did a number of salons and heard and learned from the employers in this industry what they needed, what their deficits were, what was important. And then from there, we've been designing a project that will kick off in February with a convening, and we will have employers at the table. We will have education entities and alternative education entities, K-12, technical schools, universities, colleges at the table. We will have workforce and community-based organizations at the table. And the idea is to get people, stakeholders all in the room, having conversation and dialogue to create a flywheel around an industry and create a blueprint, trying to establish replicable blueprints that can create a connected talent ecosystem, which then attracts the industry, which is already coming to the region because they already have like SpaceX coming to the region and Google coming to the region and Amazon coming to the region for these data centers. But if you want to have a successful industry movement like that, you've got to have the talent. And so, and because I know from my economic development partners that talent is one of the biggest things that that is used in that space to attract major industry to a region.
Mm-hmm.
And so we will be working over the next year and a half to create that dynamic ecosystem that can supply talent for the businesses that need it. But it will be an employer focused, business driven approach. And we will work with our education partners to help meet that pipeline. And hopefully by the end of this entire project, we will also have those technological systems in place to make sure all of the entities are connected together and able to share the information, and that skills visibility comes to the forefront. The Arizona work is all about doing for education some of the ecosystem work you heard me describing in Texas. All of the higher ed entities, community colleges and universities in Arizona are at the table having conversations about how they build their connected infrastructure so that they can minimize transition points for learners. High school into university, high school into college, into the workforce, all these different back to college, back to university. And right now they're figuring out how they can consume credentials, much like we're trying to get employers to consume credentials in that space. That's the only project I know of that's really focused on the education side of things.
Yeah, I find it so interesting what you just said a moment ago. I mean, everything you just said was very interesting. But one thing that sticks out to me in what you just raised, Naomi, is this concept of employers need to see talent in the space in order to be attracted to the region, and yet learners need to know that there are jobs available for them to go into, right? And so it's kind of like this chicken or egg phenomenon of like, where do you start, right? And I feel like that's such a big challenge in this work, is figuring out how to, as you're saying, build that flywheel, but you have to ground it in some kind of a starting point, right? Like, so I'm curious,
Absolutely.
I mean, if you have any thoughts or insights there around like, how do you start, right? What do you need to show first in order to like get this work going?
Well, and there's actually a third element there that's even adding another wheel going into that hamster there, which is all about the emergent fields, right? So there's a number of emergent industries. Historically, we've always worked from targeted occupation lists. Where's the gap? Where's the need? What do we need to fill, right? And when you're talking about emergent industries, whether that's AI, like this data processing, sustainable energy, right? We can go into like automation, robotics, we can talk about all of that, but they're emerging industries. And as a result, you don't necessarily have the workforce data to support that those jobs are needed, which is coming first. And how do you think about this? In this
Yeah.
particular case, how did it start? And I would say that this has probably got to be, it's a huge element and insight for myself in learning this past year. Champion, there's a local champion who is driving the effort and basically saying, and he's talking to people, he's attracting businesses, and he is a very successful businessman. He owns Chola Energy and Chola Petroleum, and he's been called out in the literature as the crypto cowboy, but he is that voice in the region that has really started the movement to get the traction, to get like, where do you start? It was with him. He's the
Mm-hmm.
power and the voice behind it. And then as a result, that's created other levers to make things happen. And then there is local market data that can support that there was already a number of data processing organizations that were beginning to work there.
As you're speaking, Naomi, it's making me think, Caitlin, of some of our work as well. I mean, a
Mm-hmm.
project we've been doing in my home state where I'm sitting right now, Rhode Island, with this helping to build a plan for workforce development in the life sciences industry. It's that chicken or egg issue with respect to economic development, but it's also like you also don't want to train people for jobs that don't exist yet. So it's also trying to figure out like, well, what do we do currently that we do well that we can build on that can then become the basis for the attraction and training people for future jobs. It's a very delicate dance.
You're exactly right, Julian, because even as we're talking about data processing, now data processing isn't new, right? We've had since cloud computing emerged on the market, you've started seeing more decentralized data processing centers
Mm-hmm.
that have came into the market. As part of that work, and there was an article I read that said for every data processing center you need 800 electricians. So we're not just talking IT and cybersecurity and data networking folks that know how to do it. We're also talking plumbing and HVAC and
Right.
electricians and all of these. So to your point, Julian, there are talent pieces there of that puzzle that are already in existence that you can leverage in thinking about that,
Mm-hmm.
and leverage the existing market even while you build those burgeoning industries that are coming forward.
Mm.
And because it takes time to get all of those things going. So Julian, your point's well taken.
Naomi, you talked about the salons that you held in Texas to drive this work forward across a range of stakeholder groups. And really, it sounds, with the goal of breaking down these silos that we all talk about, right, are maybe front and center more than ever before, because we're trying to do more and more of this, very needed cross-functional and cross-stakeholder work. What are the biggest challenges you face as you work across these different groups to build new models and new systems? And where do you see emerging opportunities?
What's fascinating to me is my education colleagues, just about every college and university has an advisory board, right? And they bring employers in and they ask them to sit on an advisory board. And I'm going to make a broad generalization here that is not accurate for everyone, but say a lot of them are sit and listen to what we've been doing, and please nod your head at and yeah, give us a few comments here and there about what we need to do. But it's not
Mm-hmm.
meaningful, deep work. And when they ask the employers to come, and they don't always come and sustain over time, my education colleagues get frustrated with the fact that, hey, we invite them and they don't come.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so my point has always been, why are we expecting them to come to us? Why aren't we going into them? Why aren't we meeting them where they're at, right? Like, why aren't we going to where employers are having your HR conferences,
Mm-hmm.
where they're having skills conversations, where they're doing all of these things? Because I've been in a number of meetings where I've heard people say, yeah, but the employers, they're just not there. They're just not ready. They're not doing these things. Well, my conversation suggests, oh yeah, they're doing this, they're having the skills dance, but they're having the same skills dance that the educators are having within the organization. They're trying to get their own closets in order. They're trying
Mm-hmm.
to make their own skills taxonomies situated. And what's been most important for them is not skills based hiring, but skills for optimization of their own organizations, because the
Mm-hmm.
ROI has really been about the optimization in their own organizations. Just like on the educator side, our higher ed institutions are awarding credentials because that's where their ROI is. They're not necessarily accepting credentials on the way in the door through digital credentials and
Mm-hmm.
their digital micro credentials or other forms of digital skills in the door either. They're not hiring based off of skills, but it's really easy to say, oh, they're just not interested in playing, right? And so helping break that down and really think about what that looks like. We actually, at the lab, we designed a new activity last year that we call the skills simulation. And if anyone's participated in a poverty simulation before, it's very much like that. Everyone has a persona that they're asked to assume as part of the exercise, everything from an employer, a learner, an education entity, or a community-based organization. And the goal is to have our opportunity seekers end up in jobs. And
Mm-hmm.
through the journey, they quickly realize with these different personas where all those challenges exist in our current systems and how fractured it is as they go through that process. So sometimes it's just a matter of helping people walk a mile in the shoes of the other entities to really understand what we're dealing with here. And
Mm-hmm.
as we keep talking about skills and skills-based practices, it's so much bigger than skills because we're really talking about competencies, even though skills has become the more mainstream vernacular.
Yeah, it's so true. It's fun. I'm kind of smiling and nodding for those of you listening to audio who can't see us. It's just so fun to have this conversation with someone who's kind of in the playing in the same sandbox, because it's just so interesting to hear your take on it. And I think you just offered some really good advice. Part of what we do here with workforces is, so the whole idea is we're helping these education and workforce leaders navigate this very complicated intersection of work and learning. Can you offer, so they can become forces just like you, some more very specific practical steps that folks can take in developing innovative and responsive, programs to meet current and future needs?
So one of the things I mentioned early on is that we use human-centered design at the lab
Mm-hmm.
for coming up with new models to make all this work. So please don't think in anything I'm saying that it is a here's how you fix it, this is how it should work kind of thing. Because really it depends on the stakeholder, meaning education, the vantage is the education entity, is the vantage the employer. Like when we're saying what are the tangible steps, I think it looks different for each of those entities and even for the opportunity seeker. Because the thing I love about this environment is that person who's seeking opportunities can be empowered now in so many ways that they otherwise couldn't have been previously. People have, once they're given full advantage of the skills that they own, you might be thinking to yourself, oh, I always knew my skills, I always could do these things. Well, you may have known your skills, but how do you communicate those in a way that can be consumed by others, right, in a different way? And so we're at an intersection, I think, where we're at an inflection point where I can see true systemic change happening. So a few things that I would say. One, if you're on the education side, really get in and listen. I mentioned employer salons. Those are really informal sessions we have with employers in an informal environment to have a conversation about what their need is. We listen. We do not say, we've got your answer. We listen and we take down notes. And from there, we then can come back and say, okay, so now let's design together. Let's think about things together. So understanding would be the first step through all of that. The second piece is as we ideate to what the possible model is to do it together. So if I'm an employer who's really looking for some support, like I really need someone to take on to help me fill this particular training pathway, let's say, make the call to the local community college, make the call to the university, somehow get that partner and sit down and really talk with them about what the need is, and understand, if you're an employer, where I start to see, and this is just tangible steps, where I start to see the barriers break down are in those industries that have become at a crisis, and employers are working together within an industry. So for instance, rather than it being just my company trying to fill my job roles, I'll use healthcare as an example. I have other projects in healthcare. It's become such a crisis that the healthcare entities, previously in competition with each other, they know they're just stealing the talent from one to another, giving bonuses. I'll give you a $10,000 signing bonus and you jump from one hospital and come over to me. They're not fixing their talent pipeline because all they're doing is trading it back and forth. And once they come to the table together and talk across their industry, they're then able to think about more innovative solutions together that then potentially can open up that pipeline in a way that then is going to bring all of them more success rather than that competitive nature. So I'm not giving you step one, step two, step three, because I think the stakeholder group is different, and those steps look different for those individuals, as far as what that looks like. The opportunity seeker is now completely empowered to take your resume and a job description and put it through OpenAI. And as they do that, they're going to come out with a resume that looks right along the lines of what that employer was asking for. Now, I'm giving away a big secret because now those employers are going to get resumes that all look alike. Another big hairy problem now, where we're going to have to figure out how to really start thinking about matching up those skills for optimal benefit for everybody involved.
As you mentioned earlier, Naomi, that really does, right, in some way all circle back to competencies, both a way to communicate on the learner side and a way to validate on the employer side.
That's
right? To go way beyond what Chat GPT will do to ensure that you're really able to confirm what people know and can do.
We've got to get down to trust. Sorry.
Yeah, it also circles back to the personalization notion. Like ultimately, And this is coming up in a bunch of conversations around AI is like, how do we even, if students are going to be, for example, if students are using AI, how do we know what the student knows? Ultimately, it comes down to similarly on the job, what can that person do? How are they going to represent? And even though the resume may look like everyone else's, how are they going to distinguish themselves and describe what they do and show clarity about the context in which they're carrying their skills to the next way station?
Absolutely. And so part of that skills visibility, this is a personal belief, and it was something that I actually came to when I came to the lab that was part of their conversation, which is explicitness and intentionality. So part of the learning process, and this is back on the education side, things to do, is really think about how we're making the skills and competencies that we're embedding into our learning process intentional for the learner. They need to understand exactly what they're learning when they're learning it, and explicitness so that they can then walk into a job interview. Let's say somebody is, we've said we've empowered somebody with critical thinking, right? Like how many of our general education classes talk about, embedding critical thinking? Well, okay, so I put on my resume, I can do critical thinking, and then I walk in, or ChatGPT tells me to put on my resume critical thinking, and then I
Right,
I
what I'm
walk
thinking.
into, I get through the gate, and I come into this interview, and I get asked, okay, so give me an example of when you displayed critical thinking and what was included in that. If I can't explicitly say what were the competencies and how did I demonstrate those, it's pretty clear that maybe I don't have those skills, but I could have those skills. I just don't know how to talk about it. So that
Mhm.
explicitness, the transparency, the intentionality becomes really important on those steps, right? To
Mhm.
success of being able to do that. And I would say that that's a big part of this whole skills movement.
Absolutely. And that's a skill in and of itself, right? I mean, just to communicate
Oh, yeah.
those skills and building that skill for a learner as well. Really appreciate the steps you've provided, and we totally recognize that these are not like you can't necessarily say first you do this and then you do that,
Right.
but
Right.
at taking the concept of understanding and then ideating, I think those are some really grounded recommendations as we seek to um, drive the future of this type of work. Naomi, as we wind down our conversation today, and it's really been such a privilege to connect with you, how can our listeners learn more and continue to follow your work?
Well, really excited to connect with anybody who's interested after this podcast. But my email address is nboyer at all one word eddesignlab.org. Our website is eddesignlab.org. And we have an innovator network that you can sign up for and get ongoing newsletters that come out as part of the work to stay abreast of what the lab is doing.
Thank you so much, Naomi, for taking the time to speak with us. And I know we didn't give none of us have yet given the conclusive, perfect answer to it all. But as you say, it's all a process, and it's all about adaptation and customization and learning along the way. So hopefully that's what everyone is hearing.
Yes, all fun to run amok, and we didn't even get all the way through the design process, right? Which we would have moved into prototyping and launching all the things that as you go through that process of co-designing with your partners.
Yes, well, we'll have to have you back for a chapter 2.
Part
There we
two,
go.
yeah.
Part two.
But
Thank you
thanks
so
so
much for
much.
your time.
Thank you.
That's all we have for you today. Thank you for listening to Workforces. We hope that you take away nuggets that you can use in your own work. Thank you to our sponsor, Lumina Foundation. We are also grateful to our wonderful producer, Dustin Ramsdell. You can listen to future episodes at workforces.info or on Apple, Amazon, and Spotify. Please subscribe, like, and share the podcast with your colleagues and friends.